Jason, president of the Washington football team. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Y'all are funny.
Yeah. Look, you're only the second guest. You're following Grant Hill, so some big shoes to fill. But appreciate you guys joining us. It's okay. He's just a Hall of Fame basketball player. Don't worry about a thing.
And a brilliant investor and graduate student, all that.
Okay, so you must have seen the last AMA then. Okay, great. For all of you guys that are joining us and Jason, please feel free to ask us questions. This isn't Ask Me Anything. Scott and I will be selfish with the first few questions, get us kicked off, keep us on topic here. But you have the opportunity, of course, to chime in at any time. We'll keep an eye on the questions that come in, and we'll keep Jason on his toes here. Jason, thank you again for joining us. I wanted to touch on something that probably a few people that are joining us don't really understand about your background. You got your MBA after playing in the NFL and then went to McKinsey, which for those of us who aren't in the business world and live under a rock perhaps don't know is one of the top consulting firms in the world. And you were a partner there, is that correct?
That's right. That's right. The top. For the record.
Okay, so if we're doing that, I didn't know there was a nerd fight thing around consulting firms, but okay, so you were on the number one.
I kid. There's no official ranking, but no, it's a great firm, and there are others, but it was a great firm, and yeah, I was a partner there I was there for 7 years prior to taking this job.
Yeah, so set the stage. You did work there that is directly relevant for what you're doing right now as president of Washington football team. I want to ask you specifically about your diversity and inclusion work at McKinsey, whether or not you felt like it was rewarding or whether it was a lot of lipstick that firms did to just kind of do the feel-good thing. What was your sense while you were at McKinsey? And then let's talk about how you apply those lessons to your current role.
For sure. You know, at McKinsey, I had sort of two lives that I led. You know, I was a leader in our operations practice. So that's, you know, hardcore transformation, whether it's a power plant or university operations or a medical device company, whatever it is, redoing their processes, thinking about how culture empowers that. So all the complex things that you would think about in transforming a business at a critical time. And the thing with McKinsey is, you don't bring in McKinsey and pay those fees unless you really got something to solve. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we were working on really complex problems under a lot of heat, which is really relevant to the role that I stepped into here at the Washington football team. So if anything,
did you hire McKinsey?
I did actually.
Oh,
I just gave up client confidentiality.
Now they're the number 2 firm.
I didn't say that. I have sought them for advice. I may or may not have hired them, but yes, they're helpful. But then on the flip side, when you think about diversity and inclusion and the work that a firm like McKinsey does, you also don't get brought in on some BS. And because of that, we were doing pretty meaningful work with companies. They didn't really bring us. They might bring someone else in if you wanted lipstick. They didn't bring us in if you wanted lipstick. And you know, for example, you know, one of the main things that we tried to drive is to shift the conversation from being about a moral imperative around diversity and inclusion to a business imperative. And we tried to do that through research and data. And that's a lot of what I spent my time on. And the facts are there. You know, the most diverse leadership teams, whether it's gender or ethnicity, those companies outperform over time in measures of EBITDA, economic profit. You are long-term successful if you are able to have those in place. And then even from a bigger societal perspective, if you're able to work on social measures, like closing the racial wealth gap through your business model, it has a boost to the overall economy. In fact, one of the pieces of research we did is that if you're able to close the black-white racial wealth gap in the US, and I think business is critical to that. It's not going to be done through philanthropy. If it's closed, it's worth $1.5 trillion to the US economy. That's 6% of GDP. That's bigger than any of the last 4 economic expansions. And because of that, it's something that we should all get behind, irrespective of social orientation or political affiliation. It's just the right thing to do.
And yeah, let me just jump in. If you Google Jason Wright Sportico, you can find the op-ed he did for us on football's ability to close the racial wealth gap. I mean, really one of the most well received we've had so far.
Oh, good. Good.
And I think I wanted to also just touch on the timing that you were there. You said 7 years, and you just moved into this role. So you do the math. You were there for the transition of one presidential body into another. And I'm wondering, did you see anything that was, under the covers of these projects that was systemic, that could have given you a sense that we were reaching a boiling point? Or were you operating at the management level where it was like really just moving deck chairs and making sure that things were like, again, I'm not trying to minimize the work, but I'm trying to figure out, like, given that this was one of those leading initiatives, and given that this is so much a part of the sports conversation right now, I have to imagine in that role, you saw things that are going to help you communicate to others in the league.
Yeah, so I think when you're doing real transformation work with these companies, you're definitely in the weeds. You're meeting with frontline employees, whether it's the folks working on the front lines of an oil refinery, or the folks who are pushing paper and doing payroll at a university. Like, you're in it with them. Yes, the strategy starts at the top, and firms like McKinsey are always engaged with top management. A real transformation flows all the way down. So you're definitely engaged.
All the way down or all the way up? Because again, the NFL has this real opportunity to start with the athletes and move up.
Yeah, well, so it's actually a really good articulation of it. So the decision to invest in people and shift culture has to start up here. Because without leadership commitment, you're not going to take the time, put in the processes to hear the voice of the masses. But then once that decision has been made, absolutely, the process has to. You can't set a culture unless you ask the folks who are living in it the type of culture they want to be in. Right. And so there is a bottoms up process to, number one, assess where you're at. And then number two, figure out what are the near term things that are going to be very meaningful to people. They're often different than what I think sitting up in the C-suite. And then number two, think about how you actually sustain that change over time. What are the incentives that matter? Who are the change agents that you actually need to be on board at that level? So you do get close to all of it. And if you're talking about sort of the groundswell or the shift in opinion of folks on the front lines, I actually think folks on the front lines have been there for some time. And I don't think it's swung with an election or shifts in the political atmosphere. I think those are actually more reflective of how people have been feeling for some time. They'd sit around and you'd look around and you'd say, well, there's a lot of women or people of color here at this entry level, but there's none of us up here. That really bothers us over time, and it's demotivating and XYZ. So I think that's been there, and it's been the driving force behind this for some time. So I don't think it's new to folks at that level. I think everyone else is just waking up to the importance of it in this moment.
Jason, talk about culture. If there's one thing I know hanging around the owner suites of all the major sports, the culture is winning. That's the culture they want. Given the empirical evidence that diversity and inclusion assists in that goal, what has been the reticence? Is there one, two things? Why are we still pushing for football in particular to really embrace the inclusion?
Well, I think three things. I think, number one, I don't think people have bought into that idea yet. I actually don't think it's been told enough. The idea that culture, first of all, drives performance. I think coaches would believe that. I'm not sure that everybody in business believes that, whether it's in football or outside of it. I don't think people see organizational health as actually driving performance over time when it empirically does. So I think that's number one. That message isn't believed yet. I think number two, it is a high pressure environment in sports. A lot of industries have high pressure environments, but in sports, it's high pressure. And we have to pay attention to what the fans and the public and the media are saying, because it drives our business in a way. You can't tune it out like the players can or like other businesses can. And because of that, you often have to make very rapid decisions. Maybe the nice way of saying you got to be agile. But if you don't have good processes in place, and if you don't already have a deep commitment to diversity for business reasons, you take the path of least resistance. And what that means from a talent standpoint is you find mini-me's. We're all prone to do it. I'm prone to do the same thing. If I can find a guy who played football at Northwestern and played in the league a few years, and I've just got to make a hire real quick, I'm going to get that guy.
Because it's what you know, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
easier to communicate with those people because you share background, you share history, you share communication styles. I agree. I think that that's when we have to move quickly. Those are the things that we lean on, which is our shared past and our shared network, to try to find the people. Again, to build on what Scott just said, there's an imperative for you to come in and change the culture. And I heard a lot of your early interviews when you took the job in August. You were getting pressed on, why are you calling it this, the Washington football team and all this crap. It's like the name doesn't matter. It's the culture that gives you the identity, right? And so very specifically, now that you've been in the role a few months, I think it's more fair to ask you this question. Who are the key hires you made, and what identity do you see sort of bubbling up at the club or at the organization that gives you a sense of who you're going to be when you grow up?
That's good. Yeah, I can answer that fairly now. Well, I'll say this: the context in which we walked into was a challenging one. Not only because of the external heat, which was at a high level. I think on day 2 there was a Washington Post article that came out about what had happened here, allegations of what had happened here over decades. That's a tough thing to walk into on day 2. And that affected the workforce too, because people here heard about those experiences for the first time or relived them.
Yeah.
And that's a dagger to the workforce. So you walk into a bit of a wounded workforce. And what I found was that I needed to do 2 things right away. The first was be very accessible and listen to folks. And I made a commitment to listen to everybody, to meet everybody in the organization by the end of the year. And I'm on pace to get it done. But to have that face time, to listen, to hear their personal stories, but also to start to get the pattern recognition for culture across the organization. And then the second was to really get to know the senior leaders, and not be afraid to make swift moves, not because they're bad people, not because there's something wrong with them, but because as I quickly got my grasp of what we needed in our organization going forward, both from a leadership capacity and a skills standpoint, like there were shifts that we needed to make pretty quickly. And that's been a bit disruptive to the workforce, but I promised them and I promise y'all that in the long run, those moves are going to really, really help us. And I'm super excited with the folks we brought in. We got a chief people officer, Andre Chambers, who came to us from the Oakland A's, who completely shifted the culture there, making it one of the best places to work in sports. Hired Julie Jensen, my SVP for external engagement and communications, who we didn't have that role here before. Somebody that really oversees how we are engaging with the community, engaging with the media, our perception. And she's dope. I mean, she's remarkable. Greg Resch, who's our new CFO, just came from Rock Nation. Prior to that was with Mundo, and is a business thinker, a strategic business thinker. And if I think about the big things we have coming, expansion of our business lines with the new stadium and retail and hospitality complex coming down the pipe, that's the type of guy I need on my right-hand side, prior to me, we had some great hires too. Julie Donaldson, and our head of media and broadcasting, a very disruptive thinker, thinking about content in new ways. I've got some other folks in the pipeline coming in. My chief of staff, Amina Edwards, one of the most brilliant people I've been around. So it's all of a sudden things start to feel real different to the workforce when you've got fresh ideas and a fresh way of leading in place. And I think it'll provide dividends for us going forward.
But Jason, those people must feel empowered by the person at the top of the pyramid. I'm assuming when you were interviewing for this gig, you had a few questions for Dan Snyder. What were they, and what did he tell you that convinced you that change is possible here and that I can do what I want to do?
Well, that's the big thing coming into this. I think everybody who advised me, everyone who cared about me was like, Jason, it was like, well, I'm a Star Wars fan, and it was almost like Admiral Akbar. It's a trap. It's a trap, Jason. Don't do it. Don't do it. But their heart was in the right place. They were saying, like, I don't know if you'll have, I trust you, but I don't trust this. And so I spent most of my time with Dan and Tanya talking about trust and really asking probing questions about what they saw as the new direction. And frankly, they also wanted to develop that same thing with me, because for them, they felt like they had a really once in a long time opportunity to make sure they got someone in that they could trust to steward the business in the way that they would want. And the most important part of our conversation that convinced me that we were in the same place, that our values were aligned, was when we talked about past mistakes. And I won't share those because that's a very private conversation, but they shared about the mistakes that they had made in the past. I shared about my biggest goofs, both in business and in football and in life. And in that raw, emotional, transparent conversation, we started to align on a set of values that we wanted going forward, that were born out of things we had done wrong in the past.
I can see you not wanting to share Dan's mistakes, but could you share what your biggest mistakes what was or were and what you learned?
Yeah, one is related to inclusion and bottom-up innovation. I think in sports, it's a bit of a meritocracy in a way that business is not. You have a saying in football that the eye in the sky don't lie. And so whether or not I did my assignment as a third down back was evident on film. Did I step the right direction? Was my hand placement correct? Did the linebacker run me over, or did I hit him in the chin and put him on his back? It's very objective. It's very objective. Going over into business, that level of meritocracy, transparency, objectivity is not there. It's not there. We can pretend it is. It's not. Unless you're pushing buttons and you're getting timed, like there's no way that it's there. And I think one of my early mistakes in beginning to advise clients and colleagues in thinking about performance management and how to navigate your career, especially on the org, culture, and talent standpoint, was to say, like, if you just put your head down and work hard, it's going to work out for you. It's going to work out for you. That's just not how it works. I want to believe that, but that's not how it works. And so when you're helping a company to shift their people processes and think about their culture, you have to take into consideration that there are blind spots, there are unequal components to a meritocracy, and you have to build in reinforcing mechanisms to help organizations achieve in that direction. And there were things that I would advise colleagues, junior colleagues, to do. Just put your head down and grind. That absolutely did not work. That absolutely did not work. And I look back and I say, I really could have helped that woman, that man, that person to accelerate their career in a different way if we had talked a bit more about playing the game.
Jason, is the culture of the locker room, particularly as it pertains to coaches, is it incongruous with a thinker like you? I have had more than one NFL player tell me they went for their MBA while playing and did not tell a soul because they were afraid the perception would be they're not fully focused on football.
Oh, that's interesting. No, not for me, because I wasn't that fast on the 40-yard dash. I wasn't that strong in the weight room. I could squat a lot, but besides the squat, I wasn't impressive in the weight room. So I needed to show off my brain to keep my job. So being the smart guy who was going to make the assignments, read the blitz well, that worked well for me. So I didn't have that experience. And that's definitely not the case here because, I mean, Coach Revere went to Cal. Like Ron's a smart dude.
But don't you think there's an advantage to having smart players who are thinkers, who want to question authority? Why are we doing something? Having that well-rounded understanding of why we're doing a certain thing.
I think that's the benefit of real diversity and inclusion, and it's not just about degree attainment or college, right? That's a proxy. I would actually say that if you're an NFL player and you're successful at any level, you're smart as hell. These playbooks are thick. You have to learn in the moment within a matter of seconds to change your assignment based on the angle at which a defensive lineman is in their stance, based on the depth of a safety. The entire play changes and there's no communication between anybody. You just need to know it. You got to read it. That's a level of managing intellectual complexity. That's not normal for folks. So everyone's smart, but I think you're hitting on the key point here is, do people feel empowered to be contributors to changing what happens on the field? And I think that happens in a couple of ways. Number one, you set a culture where it's okay to fail, and you get rewarded for taking risks, for putting ideas out there. Things don't get snuffed out. And that's a culture that Riverboat Ron for sure sets, and that I want to set on my side as well. I think it's important that junior colleagues, especially those at the front lines, feel empowered to elevate creative ideas around the fan experience, new ways of packaging season ticket memberships. They understand the young fan experience in ways that we might not in our historical data and our historical research, because they are in that 12 to 24 demographic that we want to attract. So I think on both sides, both on the football side and on the business side, you have to say it's okay to come up with some silly ass ideas, and some of them will stick, and we will make sure we have the processes in place to enact those when they're good.
So let's have some fun. Let's talk about some silly ass ideas.
Okay.
We've been dealing with the serious issues here. So let's talk about the 2027 stadium-ish.
Yeah.
Right date range. Yeah. You have the opportunity. You talked about the separation of Ron's world and your world, and the ability for you to like maximize the business, building a new fan experience, reimagining what that could look like, bringing some of your McKinsey data analytics skills to the table to do that consumer research. At the Sports Innovation Lab, and a lot of the work we do with Scott and his team around the fluid fan is the idea that the diehard fan's not the path to growth for this industry, but there's a new type of fan that is. We call them the fluid fan, right? So they're consuming media in different ways. They're creators. They want to go to a stadium not just to watch what's on the field, but to have a social experience. What are some silly ass ideas that you and your team are coming up with? Do you have a clean slate, or are there plans in place? Mixed use environment with retail and entertainment all around this thing? Yeah. Lay it out there for us. Where are you?
Yeah, I can talk about the stadium itself. And then there's a build to that, in the fan experience today, because, 7 years is a long time. Like, I think a lot of people say, just wait for the new stadium. Nah, we don't have time for that. We will lose a generation of fans if we continue to have a crappy or subpar experience at FedEx Field. So separating that issue, the stadium itself is one where there's an important inclusion principle that undergirds it. Dan, Tanya, and I are committed to doing this stadium, building it and operating it in a way that espouses the principle of inclusive growth. So what that means is it's going to be architecturally stunning. It will not look like other stadiums. That's one thing right off the bat. But the way that it's built is more important. It will engage with women-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned businesses in a substantial way, in quantity of dollars and materiality of work that allows those businesses to participate in a way that they have not in the past. And that's important for this area, especially if we represent the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, which is heavily women, heavily veteran, heavily minority. It's important for us to reflect our environment in how we build this stadium. And going back to the research that I did before, we actually see the stadium project first and foremost as an economic growth engine for the region. And so based on my research, it says that's the way we should do business, because that's going to allow that economic lift to cross census tracts and be larger overall. And that's both in the building of the stadium, the venue, and how we think about the events that come to it in a year-round venue. Like, this is DC. We have a unique opportunity to have a year-round venue that goes far beyond football. Think about political conventions and things like that. Like, what could be hosted there if we design it with that in mind? And then most certainly a retail and hospitality complex around it that gives opportunities for families, business leaders, folks that want to go out at night and have nightlife experiences. How do we provide that in and around this venue as well? That's certainly in our picture. But even with that, how do we make sure that community needs from an inclusion standpoint are built in? If there are heavy educational needs, how do we think about actually having space for a school of some sort built into the venue? Our kids go Monday through Friday into a world-class venue for school.
So for those demographics and for those groups that you're identifying, the school is a very specific example. How do you make those other things real? Are you talking about like office space? Are you talking about services? Like, what does it mean to include them in the vision?
So I think you're talking about the businesses,
The veterans group. So like, what does it mean to bring them into the process?
Like if we're going to hire an architect of record.
Okay, so the subcontractors, the people that are working, make
the
development of it inclusive of and representative of the community itself.
Yeah, as a real deal business play. We don't need to make this a philanthropic thing. Right. I think that when we do work like this, it's best to build it into the business model. That's the way it's sustainable. I'm a capitalist. Like that's the way it's sustainable over time. Philanthropy can ebb and flow, and so that's how I envision it. That's how I envision it. Even with philanthropy, I picture putting it into physical infrastructure because that makes it lasting.
Dan's a capitalist too.
That's a really cool idea. Yeah.
Dan wants to make money. What do you see the differentiator among NFL teams is sort of that local revenue, like your luxury and your suites and your local revenue. What's the differentiator for you guys where you are now and possibly moving forward, whether it's utilizing tech to scale or just the physical space itself? How do you intend to differentiate yourself on the local market?
Yeah, well, I think the teams that do the best on the local market do it. I see differentiation across 3 dimensions, and they apply to where I want to go. So maybe I'm a little biased in the ones that I pick and choose to see. But one of them is they have a deep understanding of their fans, driven by data and analytics. They've got second and third order insights. They understand what their fans are doing when they're not engaging with the team and the brand. They have, personas and segments that, have multiple levels to them. And the culture itself within those teams speaks about fans in a psychographic sort of way. And that's a place that we want to get to. That's a place we want to
I'll just add real quickly to that. I think they think of their fans as customers and they don't think of them as fans, right? Yeah. So everything you just articulated is like they have a customer focus, not a fan focus. So sorry to interrupt. You had 3. So that's number 1.
That's what we do here.
Yeah. That's right. So there's an understanding of them that runs deep and is empowered by data. That is empowered by data. I think secondarily, they are very aware, based on that data, they are not afraid to take risks and be bold in designing what I call bespoke experiences for their fans or their customers. So that is like if you put on your sort of Disney Imagineer hat, they are very outside of the box in saying, well, if I am a family and I'm coming to a game, what do I want to have as my experience from the Monday in which I buy a ticket or that I decide I'm going, all the way through the end of day on Sunday when I get back home in the evening after the game? What are all the moments of delight that I want across that entire journey? And folks that think about it like that and then bring the cross-functional capabilities of the organization to bear, bring your digital and content folks to bear, bring your stadium operations to bear, engage your food vendors as thought partners instead of vendors that you're just doing a contractual relationship with. All of a sudden, those moments of delight become more frequent and more targeted and more powerful for your fans over the course of that time period. And then especially as you are able to have more varied types of experiences in your venue, you understand how to make those fit with those same folks and give them more value over time. Those are a few of the things that I see folks doing. And then, frankly, at the end of the day, they've got really buttoned up business processes, and that allows them to attract the best talent. Because to pull this stuff off, you need excited, incredibly talented people that are willing to work their tails off for you. And having a professionalized environment is what attracts that.
Oh, I love the way you just articulated that. The Sports Innovation Lab, probably in conjunction with Sportico at some level, this year is going to publish the most innovative teams and the most innovative venues. We've been working on this methodology for a while. It touches on a lot of the things you talked about. I mean, we've been pounding the first-party data drum forever, trying to get the leagues, teams, properties to kind of take a look at their customers in new ways, not be beholden to third party and buying Twitter data or scraping stuff off the web or, doing some archaic CRM stuff. But what we've done from a methodology perspective, and I just want to run this by you because you were just riffing on it, is we said that revenue diversification was a really important key metric for properties and teams that are trying to, not just be a one-trick pony. How do you think of revenue diversification in your mission and your remit in Washington?
Yeah, I'm going to play coy here. It's a big part of it. I see us, but I don't want to give it away.
Okay.
I see us.
Keeping the cards close. Got it.
I'll choose my words carefully. But I do see us evolving from a football team to a media and entertainment company.
Love it. Okay.
Right. That's at the core of what myself, the folks that I've brought in, are really excited about.
So you're launching an OTT channel and a betting platform, and you announced it here, which was awesome for you to do that.
You're doing way too much. No, but we do have some creative ideas around that, and this is something Dan is excited about, that I'm excited about as well. But we've got to earn the right to get there, and we've got some basic stuff to get done. It's easy for me to sit here and wax poetic about this bright and exciting strategic future, and we're setting things in motion to get there. But we got to have a highly professionalized business culture first. We've got to get back to a level that our market should be at in local revenue and those sort of things, right? Like we got to do well on our end, and for all of us, ain't nobody making money this year, so we need to figure out what's going down in 2021 in the first place.
What have you seen this year, though, Jason? What have you tried? What have partners tried? Other teams, leagues? What have they tried because of necessity that you think has staying power?
Yeah, I think the transition to a fully digital experience when it comes to transactions has just immediately happened, right? Anybody who was a holdout on paperless ticketing and cashless concessions and all of that stuff, like, done, right? But that's sort of table stakes. I think the other thing that's interesting that people are experimenting with is understanding both the standard and premium experience, and what are the expressly digital components of that. So how do you bring a fan into the stadium in a virtual way, or bring them behind the scenes in a virtual way that gives them some sense of premium access or additional value because they're either a season ticket member holder or a suite holder or a sponsor at a certain level. So how do you think about those things that used to be very tailored and in person, with the food and the design of the suite and in-person events and a golf trip, whatever it was before? What are the digital components of that, and how do we play those up? And what might that mean for the future, especially for our younger demographics? How does that dovetail with fantasy and sports betting experiences? And how do we give those opportunities and design them in a way that delight, like we were talking about before? So it's accelerating some of those conversations, but at the same time, frankly, all of us are trying to just keep everybody healthy. So the degree to which all of those have been implemented in the way we want varies greatly, right? There's some stuff my team has been doing, we've been experimenting with on social, taking a different tone on social, being a bit snippy, trying to drive some additional value from our sponsors. That's done well for us. That's one example of things that are going well. But there are other things we'd like to do, but at the same time, we're like, let's make sure our COVID protocols are right. And we're working with the government to have the right number of fans in the stadium. And with the incremental hours we have left, let's see what we can do. But there aren't that many. So I think you'll see a burst of this stuff in 2021 when all of us have had an off season to more carefully incubate these ideas.
So I want to acknowledge that we've had a number of great questions come in. I think Jason's answered them in different ways, but I want to touch on Lauren's question for you at this point, Jason. She asked, like, in such a male-dominated sport, are there challenges in mentoring women, and are there differences in how you approach mentoring women and minorities? So very much on the D&I sort of side of things, but what's your perspective on that?
I think the more important thing than mentorship is sponsorship. So I'll delineate the difference. Mentorship is somebody who gives you good advice, who can help you think about your career, who gives you the benefit of their past experiences. And that's definitely a gap for minorities and women in any profession, but definitely in sports as well. And that's a little bit of the social capital gap that exists when you're in the majority population versus not. But I think more importantly is those mentor relationships that convert to sponsor relationships. And those are people that give you what I call the step up opportunity. That's the individual that says, not only am I going to give you advice, but I'm going to work my network, whether it's within my organization or others, to get you a stretch role. The next thing that you need to get into that maybe you're just ready for, and someone else might not put their neck on the line for you, but I'm going to put my neck on the line for you. And I benefited from that at McKinsey for sure. There were people that put their neck out for me to accelerate my career. And it's the reason I am where I am now. But that's actually more of what we need. And to the point of when you're under pressure or when you're in a heated moment, we go to the mini-me approach. Sponsorship is one where your reputation's on the line. And so it takes additional effort to move past the psychological ease of finding the person who reminds you most of yourself and finding somebody else. But I would go back to my point about this being not a moral imperative, but a business imperative. And that's that if we are only cultivating and sponsoring leaders that look like us, we are literally not getting the best talent. And here's my logic. If talent is equally distributed across all people of all genders, of all races, which I believe, and I think most people would raise their hand and say, yeah, talent is equally distributed. Then if we don't see representative leadership in our organizations, that means by definition, we are not getting the best talent. We're not. And so it is a business imperative that everybody actually look at the network of sponsorees that they have and say, is this sufficiently diverse? And yes, gender and ethnicity are the ones that come up most prominently, and unfortunately are the ones where they're the biggest gaps, but there's also diversity of background and diversity of thought, bringing people in from outside of the industries. Oh my gosh, sports is so incestuous. I'm learning when it comes to finding talent. You go to the next club over or the buddy you worked with in sponsorship here or there. I'm not actually that interested in that. In fact, public service announcement, if you're coming from sports, I hold a really high bar, actually, on the recommendation, because I do think we need more and better disruptive thinking from other industries to cross-pollinate with. So
it's one of the key things we recommend to all of our clients, which is to hire outside of the industry. And even just when the young people who are graduating college get access to us and they say, hey, do you have an internship? What teams are hiring and stuff? My first reaction is go work somewhere else. Go learn about consumer marketing somewhere else. Go learn about, data management somewhere else, and then bring those talents to sports because you'll be so much more marketable and successful. Brendan asks, what types of sentiments do you want to elicit from your followers when you rebrand and you have your full identity done? You answered this question a little bit in terms of like, you're trying to build an identity and a culture for the organization. But This is more, I think, a question without getting into names and things like that. What will the brand of the Washington team start to feel like to the fans?
Yeah. But if you have the name, I'm okay with you telling us.
Yes. Yeah, Scott's willing to let you break news anytime you want.
That's my role.
That's his role.
I'll tell you exactly what the name is going to be. There's a hat sitting in Dan's office,
right,
and it's got 100 pieces of paper with his favorite name on it, and he's just going to reach in it, and he's going to pull out.
This is a man who's answered this question a billion times. But from a brand perspective, brand elements, brand sentiment. What do the fans of Washington football team think about this team? Badasses, edgy, gritty, like not the style of play, but the type of organization you're building.
Well, I think number one, we're at the early stages of doing the actual research to really actually understand that. So I would be way ahead, cart before the horse, to state any of those things. But that's actually what we're doing, and we're trying to do it in both a qualitative and quantitative way right now, and that's actually what our team is out there actively doing right now. In this sort of discovery phase, taking in the funnel of ideas, but also trying to get underneath the recommendation of ideas and names and ideas that are coming in to say, why is it that you want this? So that's in process. That said, I think there's a couple of current state things that are absolutely true and that will make it through the other side of this funnel that we're doing right now. Number one is we have a highly engaged fan base. And that I'm so grateful for that because this franchise has been through a lot over the years. The fan base is still highly engaged. It's just that engagement is not always super happy, right? But that starting point of a highly engaged fan base is a big asset to us. And it doesn't take much because they want to like us. They want for us to do well. It doesn't take much to convert that. And a key aspect of that is making sure that we don't suddenly feel like an expansion franchise. This is a historic franchise. Mm-hmm. Been here since 1932. our most devoted fans are connected to that rich history. And the name change, while maybe the broader public is like, this is an unambiguously good thing to do, it affected our fan base in a split sort of way, right? And so tying to our history in the right ways is really important for us going forward. And, you know, one of the things that I'm already up and doing is there is a way to use our alumni who are the face of that history. And because this is a great area to live, most of them still live in the area. How do we bring them more formally into the franchise? How do they not feel like they're on the periphery and excluded from this, especially in the midst of all the change that's going on? And so we're actually designing a formal alumni program. Julie Jensen, my SVP of Communications and External Engagement, along with Doug Williams, and a great talent I can't wait to announce if we land them, coming in to lead that program, to make it very formal, so that there is a regular cadence of engagement between our fans and our alums, where there is a systematic way in which our alums are involved with our charitable work, where they're helping me with stakeholder engagement around the stuff that we want to do in the community, whether it's a new stadium or other things, where they're involved directly with current players to help current players feel tied to that history.
Sounds like Hog's heaven to me, Jason.
There's a real.
Good, huh? You can take no footnote needed. You can take.
Thank you.
So Jason, it sounds like again, I'm gonna praise you a little bit, and I hope it doesn't fall flat because you feel like it's self-serving or something weird. But I was looking forward to this because you're a smart guy, and you're definitely bringing strategy to the NFL that most people don't have, right? So the McKinsey background comes out in everything that you're saying. You're definitely thinking about this. Amanda asks, and she sounds like maybe she worked with you at McKinsey. She's got a little bit of foresight as to what's going on. You're new, high energy, bringing in new talent, everything else. But Amanda's question really lands pretty square for me. It's like historically 70% of digital transformations fail. Most cultural transformations fail. Like, how do you get beyond this is the way it's always been done mentality in sports, which we all see. We all know that it's incestuous. It's the same people that have kind of come up from the intern ranks and are there now running things. Do you have an idea for a chief experience or transformation officer? Is there somebody on your team that has that role? How do you avoid just like putting people in roles that don't have like real teeth to them? All that strategy consulting stuff that you've dealt with a million times on projects. How do you not repeat those mistakes?
Well, I think there's two things. I can talk a little bit about some of the roles we're bringing in, and where we have an active search going on, and one that's actually quite relevant. But I think more broadly, it's a little, the title of the role and all that, that can be messy and unclear and opaque, no matter what organization you're in. What's really important is that each role has a clear remit and a set of KPIs associated with what success looks like. And that's just not like, oh, how did our revenue go up or down? That's bare bones basic, but taken to an extreme can create silos where the person who is over concessions is trying to optimize revenue and concessions, when really, in my view, concessions can be looked at as a strategic input to guest experience, which then drives season ticket membership and premium experience, which is actually more valuable to us as a franchise, rather than optimizing the P&L related to concessions, right? So you need measures that, yes, focus on the hard dollars and cents, but also foster collaboration across the organization and make our leaders understand how their activities impact the outcomes of others. Better collaboration between sponsorship and suites, a real understanding from our marketing team having input on what is in a season ticket member package, those types of things, and evaluating leaders around those. So to me, the roles are less important than the measures of success, both qualitative and quantitative. That said, you do need people to be on point for things. And one of the roles that we are actually actively hiring for is a senior role in guest experience, who's the person who is the hub of all the stuff that we've been talking about, who will design and lead our entire organization and engage our fans in the redesign of those customer journeys, end to end. And that's a really critical role for us that we're actually out in the market hiring for now. There are a few other roles that are open because of people that have moved out of the organization that I'm hiring as well that are critically important. But That's an example of us identifying a set of measures that someone needs to own and be thinking about every day when they wake up, and going out and trying to get great talent.
Yeah. The Falcons have done this particularly well. I mean, there's a fan experience group that runs across a bunch of different departments within that organization that allow them to act autonomously, be the advocate for the fan. It's so rare to hear people say personas. So it's, like you're already scratching a lot of the needs I think that this industry has. Scott, do you have anything else? We're getting toward the bottom of the hour. I want to make sure I don't monopolize.
Yeah, Jason, I just wanted to get your take on sort of the addendum to the Rooney Rule that we're seeing now. This compensation for a team that perhaps would lose a person of color. We used the term "stupid ass ideas" earlier. I don't know if that is one.
I think we said silly.
Oh, did we say silly? Well, either or. But we spoke to some economists who said that it would disincentivize one team from taking a coach because of the compensation being given to, let's say, a division opponent. Just your thoughts. I assume as one who recognizes the data and analytics of it all, you'll let everybody else fail. Let them stick with the old way of thinking.
Yeah, no, that's actually an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that. Certainly within division, yeah, you could have that. You could have that beef. I think, but that's actually the starting point for a discussion. That's what I like about this. So number one, again, I'm a capitalist. So I believe that incentives, especially financial ones, are the most powerful way to drive behavior. Well, I shouldn't say the most powerful. They are the quickest and the most near-term incisive. I think the deeper emotional ones are actually the most powerful and longer term. But so with that, I'm always excited about people pushing the needle and experimenting with financial incentives around things that are different and a bit controversial. I think it's a great thing. And I talked about this a ton when I was at McKinsey. Like, financial incentives are the ways that the companies that have moved the needle with minority talent and leadership have done it. It's like tying executives' bonuses to how many people of color they sponsored and brought up through the ranks. Controversial, but it works. So that said, I like this as a starting point. And as people weigh in, whether it's economists or you think about other folks in the division, they say, oh, this actually would disincentivize me. Then you continue to iterate and adjust. I think the challenge is we look at each of these as a panacea and we think, well, that's it. That's going to do it. It should be the starting point for an evolution that gets to a good answer. And you just keep tinkering with it until as many of those externalities are by the wayside. And frankly, if we just had to talk about it at the end of the day, something is better than nothing. If all of corporate America just did the Rooney Rule in general, and for as much criticism as the Rooney Rule has gotten for being ineffective, XYZ, I sure as heck think we would see a whole lot more executives of color than, since Roger Ferguson just stepped down, was it 3 Black CEOs across major corporations? Like,
I'm taking to Langston Hughes, though. What happens to the dream deferred? Does it fester like a sore, or does it explode? Is there an explosion on the horizon?
I hear you preaching. That's hard to say. I don't think so. I think that especially for women, people of color, LGBTQ plus folks, and this is just me being real with you, I think all of us, we walk into any industry, we walk into corporate America, and we know that we're going to take some extra weight on the shoulders when we do it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. And I think the folks that are entering in are wide-eyed. They know that. They see opportunities like that as win behind them, but they know they want to go get this for whatever mission reason they have in their hearts, whether it's to provide generational wealth for their families or to make a difference in society or XYZ. And I think that intrinsic motivation and that strength that comes, that unique strength that comes from being the only or the other in many situations, is going to continue to drive folks forward and keep them motivated and ambitious. I don't think we're going to see. I don't think we're going to see any sort of regression or sigh of desperation.
No, and my only bias in this is that those are going to be athletes, because you need that killer instinct, that confidence, and that go-getter. I think that you guys are clearly the ones who are breaking the new ground, because you're going to put yourselves out there and you're going to fight the fight. And this has been awesome, Jason. Real quick, because we're winding down, one thing we like to do is make sure that we give our guests the last word. Was there anything Scott and I didn't ask that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No, y'all did a good job of pulling everything out of me and more. Got myself.
I don't think we got everything we wanted. What did we have on our checklist, Scott? A name?
A few things. Yeah.
No,
got everything I wanted.
You want everything you wanted. Well, that's our goal. That's our goal. Make our guests happy. Bring them in. But what do we have next, Scott? We have Val Ackerman next.
Val Ackerman coming up next. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, you just you set the pace for her, Jason. So we appreciate you doing that. And thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your ideas. And big fans. Keep pushing. Best of luck in Washington.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. You well.